I think that as time goes on, we're recognizing more and more and more that mental health and metabolic health are completely intertwined, and that the gut brain connection is behind a lot of what people are struggling with.
If you've been watching, you know that I take my ingredients very seriously, but there are 3 companies that I have found that I absolutely love. Check the description for discount codes. Hello, welcome to my podcast. My name is Adrian. Today I have with me David Wayne. He is the owner of Describe, and he's a contributor to a podcast called Nurses Out Loud. He's also a 10-year psych nurse. Thank you for coming on my show.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, Adrian.
Could you tell us what Nurses Out Loud is?
Nurses Out Loud is a radio program on America Out Loud News that goes to podcast format a couple days later. So they've attracted several nurses to this show that's turned into one of their most popular shows.
So, and then what is Describe?
So Describe.health is my health coaching company. It's something I started about a year ago now. So I'm a registered nurse, as you said, background in mental health. I spent about 10 years in an inpatient psychiatric setting. And through discovering the keto and carnivore community, I saw how people using a low carb diet were having incredible outcomes for their mental health when they were doing it for other reasons like autoimmune issues. And so I'm trying to spread the good word about these ways of eating that can have incredible impacts on people's mental health. Because as somebody who's been part of the mental health establishment, I can tell you that the outcomes are not great, that there's a lot of people being essentially put on a factory conveyor belt towards more and more and more pills, and it just doesn't go well long term. So my company is a health coaching company where I'm trying to navigate the waters of helping people avoid going on more psychotropic medications through nutritional interventions.
You know, I was put on every antidepressant and anxiety medicine, and none of them ever seemed to help. Are you seeing any medications that truly help people?
Yes, I do see that sometimes. So, in the hospital setting, we see people who are in full blown psychosis, people with schizophrenia, people with mania, and also people who are so depressed that they can barely get out of bed, people who are catatonic, where they're literally incapable of even interacting with their environments. And I have seen people in those situations who are greatly helped by psychotropic medications. The problem is that we've become extremely liberal with giving out these medications, and it's become easier and easier to get a mental health diagnosis, and then you kind of get put on that factory line. So we've kind of greased the wheels for primary care providers to be prescribing things like antidepressants, and it puts people on this path sometimes where if they were actually given informed consent about these medications, we would not see tens of millions of people taking them, which is what we currently see. We see unprecedented levels of people on psych meds, and our outcomes by every measure are worse than they've ever been. Something ain't working.
Are you ever allowed to talk to people about diet?
So it's not generally part of something that's gone into in depth in the hospital setting, which, you know, I can kind of understand why sometimes, because sometimes it's just not the right time and the place. So the education they generally get, however, it's kind of the establishment my plate sort of recommendations, where you are avoiding fat at all costs. Fat is so demonized and villainized, and people even on the psych unit, they're getting incredible amounts of sugar, they're getting incredible amounts of ultra processed foods and things in seed oils. And you might get a Nutrigrain bar, but like, all right, you just ate a ton of gluten and sugar, and is it really healthy? Is it really helpful? Fruit juices and stuff like that. So people are given these inflammatory diets, these diets that spike their blood sugars and affect their moods and affect their brain chemistry, uh, and set them up for failure.
If you could help them, what would you suggest?
So it would kind of depend on the person. And I think that what I would suggest is that people need to develop their mindfulness skills. They need to remove addictive foods from their diet so that they can figure out what works for them. I do not believe there's any one way of eating that's going to work for everyone, but I do believe there's a general foundation that is important for everyone, and that's to get rid of the sugar, get rid of the seed oils, get rid of the super addictive, ultra processed foods, eat a whole foods based ancestral diet, and see how it goes. And then you are finally able to practice those mindfulness skills where you're not dealing with the urges that you get from the standard American diet, where you can check in with your body, where you can see what you eat affects you. I think that that's the foundation for everyone, is that they need to get to that point so that they can figure out what their individual needs are. And maybe for some people that'll mean going all the way down to the lion diet and really getting an incredibly restrictive way of eating going for them until they can incorporate things back in and see how it goes, and see what their trigger foods are, and get in tune with their own body.
So, do you see a lot of adverse reactions? I ask this because I have a friend who's on quite significant medicine and
Mhm,
she ends up in the hospital, I want to say weekly with heart issues, and she
mhm.
never gets any resolution. She just gets sent home.
I have become more and more and more concerned about the side effects of psychiatric meds the longer I stay in the game. I'm actually really resentful towards the education I got in nursing school, because we had multiple classes on how to interpret clinical research, and evidence-based practice was the mantra. It was something that was just drilled into us all the time, but we were not taught how rampant fraud was, and we were not really taught to question authority. We it's Healthcare is very hierarchical, it's very authoritarian. The CNA obeys the nurse obeys the doctor obeys their medical director, the medical director is obeying um, the national authorities, that sort of thing. You don't question authority, and that has led to some incredible disasters, because as people have become more and more aware of, especially over the course of the last few years, we have some serious problems going on at the highest levels of the medical establishment, and the authorities, they get a lot wrong sometimes, and the consequences are disastrous. Excuse me. um, for me, I was kind of progressing through my career as a nurse. I became a charge nurse. I became involved in all these committees. My career was going great, and it was back in 2017. I won a Nursing Excellence in Leadership award at my hospital, which was quite a career highlight. And it was, I guess, ironically, right around that time that I was starting to go down these rabbit holes about drugs like Vioxx and things like OxyContin, and also some of the psychotropic medications that I was giving to patients every day at work. And what I was learning was just incredibly disturbing, and started to make me question the whole thing. When you look at Vioxx, it's at first glance, it's like, okay, this medication was released, and after it was on the market for a few years, the FDA noticed that there was this danger signal of cardiac side effects, and so it was pulled off the market. And then there were some class action lawsuits, and some of the people who had heart attacks and died, they got some money. But here you go, the system's working as intended, right? And you really dig into it, and it's actually a much darker story. It's the people at Merck who were doing clinical trials on Vioxx recognized that it had these cardiac side effects, and they made a decision to create another clinical trial that would mask those side effects. And then they withheld information from the FDA. It was approved, it was put on the market, and some doctors started to notice that their patients were dying, and those doctors spoke out, and they were smeared by Merck. Merck went after them at the institutions where they were working. They got people fired, even though they knew that those doctors were right. They kept that up for 4 years, and something like 60,000 people in America alone died from it. And we only know this because of the class action lawsuits, because we got internal memos and meeting minutes and emails where we can see that all this happened. And it's not a case of the system working as intended because these rare safety signals got found out later. It was absolutely predatory. And what's more disturbing about that is how, oh, okay, well, they were fined, except that their fines were way less than their profits. So it doesn't actually disincentivize them to do something different in the future. And those people who did that, we know their names. You can look them up on LinkedIn today. Their careers took off from doing that. One of them's the CEO of another pharma company. Somebody else moved on to a board at Harvard. And if you think that's an outlier, unfortunately, it's not, because when you start looking at OxyContin with Purdue Pharmaceuticals, same thing. When you look at Zantac, same thing. When you look at Zygris, same thing. And when you start to look at psych meds, you see a lot of the same thing. You see this incredibly broken, predatory system where all too often the healthcare experts, the ones who are supposed to protect the American public from that sort of predatory behavior, are all too often they're complicit in it, or at best they're incompetence. And that is alarming. That is something that we were not taught in nursing school. That's something that the doctors I've talked to are not taught in medical school either. Again, we're taught to obey authority and to put them up on a pedestal. And like with OxyContin, when the opioid crisis was starting to generate some bad publicity for Purdue hired an advertising agency to help them supercharge sales. And a lot of the people at that consulting firm were working at the FDA at the same time regulating OxyContin. You can't make this stuff up. It's absolutely insane.
Oh, profit, or do you think there's more there?
I think a lot of it is essentially, well, there is more there. A lot of it is, at the institutional level, these companies are there for profit. They are beholden to shareholder value. So that is their primary function, is to generate value for shareholders. And then what you see at the tops of these food chains is that your career doesn't advance to the very tops of these corporations unless you're playing that game, unless you're willing to be kind of cutthroat, and you don't get there unless you have some of those sociopathic personality characteristics. You don't get to those points of power where you're the one in the room when those decisions are being made. And I think that's something that's really important for people to understand when we use this kind of vague, nefarious, we say they did this and they did that. It's like it's not everybody at Pfizer. It's not everybody at Merck. It's not everybody at the CDC. It's not everybody at the FDA. There are huge amounts of fantastic, brilliant people trying to do good in the world who are working for these companies and working for these federal institutions. But they're not the ones who are going to get into these key positions unless they're willing to play games like that. And we see that in how their careers progress after these incredible scandals are uncovered. And it's actually really hard to even pin down sometimes, because some of these scandals don't get adequate coverage in the media, and people don't know about them. And a lot of that is because of how much of the advertising budgets of these mainstream media companies are paid directly from pharma. And that's obvious anytime you turn on cable TV. It's pharma commercial after pharma commercial after pharma commercial. We're one of two countries in the world that allow that. And part of it is to sell drugs, but part of it is also because these TV shows, they're not going to bite the hand that feeds them, and they get most of their revenue from pharma advertising.
It just seems to me, and maybe I'm a conspiracy theorist though, that it just seems so coincidental that they're keeping people sick, and we're also being kept sick with our food. And so it just
Mhm.
seems like it's population control. Sorry to go there.
No, No, I don't think I don't think you can be conspiratorial enough these days. I think that we are at a point where we need to question everything because there's so much that we need to untangle, and we really don't know what's going on. We have a multitude of crises in our country going on right now regarding our health that are untenable, that are on a completely catastrophic path. If rates of autism don't start dropping fast, we are going to get to the point where so many kids are entering adulthood where they need to be taken care of instead of entering productive roles in society, entering the workforce, starting their own families. That is going to be absolutely crippling as a society. Rates of cancer, especially amongst youth, are increasing. Rates of fertility are declining. We know that men's testosterone and sperm counts are down 50% compared to I think it's the late 70s, early 80s. We have a fertility crisis that's untenable. We're already facing population collapse. Our population would be going down right now if it weren't for all the illegal immigrants coming across our southern border. We're already below replacement rate in terms of our reproductive health in this country. In terms of autoimmune disease, we've gotten to a point where it's ballooning and it's untenable. In terms of diabetes and obesity, it's ballooning and it's untenable. All these things are really, at the rate they're currently increasing, they are existential. They are completely crippling to our society. And when you look at the possible culprits, we've got big food. Okay, so we've got big ag, and we've got companies like Monsanto who are dousing our food with glyphosate. We've got things like microplastics coming from petroleum-based products that we package our food in and that we're around every day of our lives. We've got things like Wi-Fi radiation, where we made it illegal back in the 1990s to do further research on the dangers of Wi-Fi radiation, as if our cell phones now are comparable to what we had back in the 1990s, much less all this other Wi-Fi technology that we're around. We literally put up barriers to finding out what are causing all these health crises. We see the same playbook being used. It's the playbook that was perfected back when they spent years and years and years claiming that cigarettes don't cause cancer. That's the playbook that's still getting used with all these other products that we eat, that we take as a pill to this day.
Do any of the prescriptions that you see being administered in your hospital, do any of them heal? Do any of them help a person overcome whatever the root cause is? Or is this all just genetic?
I would say that none of them heal. Some of them might have a sedating effect. So if somebody is manic or somebody is in the throes of schizophrenic psychosis, it might give their brain some much needed rest. But to take antidepressants for an example, do they heal? No. What they do is they create a blunting effect. So what that means for some people is that that grief that they're feeling, it kind of takes the edge off the grief, except that it also can take the edge off of joy. So you'll have people where, they might be started on an antidepressant and then they go through things like the death of a parent or the birth of a child. And there's just this wall up where they are not experiencing joy, they're not experiencing grief, and it puts a barrier between them and their own humanity because you need to experience grief. It's part of being human and you have to work through it. Just being numbed to it is not healing. And the other problem with antidepressants, especially SSRI antidepressants, is that numbing is all too often not limited to your emotions. Often there's a physical numbing. For some people, it can be permanent, even after they stop taking the medication. The people who have gone through this, you can only imagine the horror of being depressed and then having this iatrogenic harm done to you, and then there's widespread ignorance about it from the medical community. So people get harmed and then they get told it's all in their head, and it's a horrible situation for them.
This opens such a can of worms. I have a question about a specific one. I
Okay.
took Boost Bar when I was pregnant, and I was told that this is so benign. That's what I was told. This is so
Yeah.
benign. It could never hurt anybody. So I took it, and I took a very high dose, whatever the
Mhm.
highest dose was, while I was pregnant. And my son came out with tremors. And they said it can't be from the Boost Bar because that one is benign. That can't be from Boost Bar. That's the only prescription I was taking, including I wasn't even taking allergy medicine, not even Zyrtec. That was the only thing that I took other than food. And he has significant behavioral and cognitive issues. I don't want to say cognitive, like he's not slow, but it's like
Yeah.
he's not there. It's like he's maybe a little bit on the spectrum.
From what I've heard and seen, and I believe the research at this point is pretty much settled that antidepressants are not safe during pregnancy. And for you to be told that it's benign is wildly problematic because, okay, if it's benign, how is it helping your depression? Like something that's benign isn't going to have an effect on your mood. Unfortunately, a lot of doctors are ignorant about these things, and to some extent, it's not their fault. At the same time they were doing that, they had their marketing team working on a new depression scale. They had their marketing team create a depression scale called the PHQ-9, and a lot of people might be familiar with it because it's widely used throughout the country to this day. You might think that something like that would be developed by a team of psychiatrists and psychologists and other experts in the field, but no, it was by Pfizer's marketing team because they wanted to encourage primary care providers to prescribe their new antidepressant to maximize profits for shareholders. So think about those two things happening at the same time. Hey, we're going to have our marketing team create this depression scale to make primary care providers comfortable prescribing antidepressants, which are outside their normal wheelhouse. And we're going to withhold fatal side effect information from those same prescribers about these antidepressants. That's what Pfizer did. That's what companies like Lilly do. That's what companies like Merck do. That's what companies like Glaxo do. That's what companies like Gilead do. That is the business model, unfortunately, for these titans of our healthcare system.
Now that you mention that, when I used to go to the doctor, every single time they made me take in a depression and an anxiety quiz on the computer. Is that the same thing?
It's very
Every
possibly the
single
same
time,
thing. Yeah,
the
it's
same
very
quiz. And
possibly the same thing.
now that you mention this, the only reason they would actually do that is to push some drugs on you. And the other drug pushing that happened is immediately when I did my hospital births, immediately after giving birth, it's what birth control are you going to go on now? We family plan. And they're like, no, no. I mean, you're like 38 now. What medicine you want? We got to write you a prescription for your birth control.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah.
that's not helping anybody.
That's not helping anybody, and I feel like birth control is a whole other can of worms we could get into, and some of the gaslighting that goes on with some of the side effects of birth control. It's not. It's something on my radar. It's something I wouldn't consider myself an expert in, but it is definitely something um, worth looking into. I would not trust establishment authoritative voices on birth control either at this point. But I've seen so much, and I've become so distrustful that it's kind of that way about everything with me at this point.
Tell me if I'm off base here. My whole life, all this anxiety and depression, I was told I needed therapy and I
Mhm,
just needed to work through my stuff more. And I
mhm.
needed to pray and I needed to meditate and blah, 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 blah. Nobody ever said, hey, that's actually a physical reaction to maybe something you're eating, maybe something in your environment. Your brain might be inflamed, blah, 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 other things. Never other things, just mostly let's try to therapy it out. And if that doesn't work, here's a drug. Am I wrong that most of this I'm not saying people don't need to work on themselves, but am I wrong that a lot of this is more physical than going to repeat therapy?
Yeah, absolutely. I do think that therapy can be incredibly beneficial for some people with some situations, but I think that as time goes on, we're recognizing more and more and more that mental health and metabolic health are completely intertwined, and that the gut brain connection is behind a lot of what people are struggling with in this country. There's a fantastic book called Brain Energy by Chris Palmer. He's a psychiatrist out at Harvard, and he gets into a lot of the details about mitochondrial health. Yeah. We learned in nursing school that mitochondria are the batteries of our cells, that they generate ATP, which is used for energy at the cellular level. What we didn't learn so much about is how they also impact hormones and neurotransmitters, and have just an incredible impact on brain function, and that a lot of mental illness actually can be traced down to healthy mitochondria. The keto diet used to be the first line treatment for epilepsy back before we had anti-seizure medications. Today, people with bipolar disorder are given anti-seizure medications. They're not told to watch what they eat. They're not even really asked what they eat. They're just given some, generic, like, you should follow the MyPlate guidelines, and then they're just loading themselves up on a high carb, low fat diet instead of giving their brain ketones to run off of. And yeah, I think as time goes by, there is a growing grassroots movement that is recognizing this. I think since our ways of communicating have changed so much over the last few years, how our mainstream kind of establishment ways of sharing healthcare information are breaking down, just like they're breaking down for sharing news. We're seeing more and more people who are breaking away from kind of the expert guidance and learning ways of healing that are they're being incredibly successful for themselves, and then they're sharing their story, and it's kind of snowballing. It's very encouraging to see.
Let's say I've been diagnosed bipolar. What would be, if not, is there anything that you would test for to give a little bit more information about why this is happening?
Yeah, I think when somebody is being considered for any sort of mental health diagnosis, there should be just an absolute battery of labs done first before anybody essentially jumps to any conclusions. I think that you have to look at things like thyroid function. I think you have to look at things like inflammation. You have to look at C-reactive protein. You have to look at vitamin B6. You have to look at cyanocobalamin, B12. You have to rule out that there isn't some sort of actual metabolic or physical reason for whatever these mental health symptoms are. Making a mental health diagnosis is the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual that psychiatrists use to make a mental health diagnosis, is kind of notorious for. Let's just say it's kind of the redheaded stepchild of the medical establishment. There are a lot of fair criticisms from more legitimate medical specialties about psychiatry, and that kind of judgment towards psychiatry, that kind of looking down on psychiatry, it goes back decades and decades and decades. And it was actually when a lot of these psychotropic medications first came out that a lot of people suddenly saw psychiatry as like, oh, maybe there is something, more medical going on here. Maybe there is some sort of chemical imbalance, and that mental illness is a medical issue. But as the decades have gone by, the evidence of chemical imbalance, of depression being caused by low serotonin, or psychosis being caused by some problem with the dopaminergic system, the evidence just hasn't manifested, but the commercials have stuck with us so deeply. Those commercials from the 90s that told us your depression is caused by low serotonin and you'll have to take this medication for the rest of your life. Like, despite the fact that the evidence was never there, is not there now, like, that narrative has really stuck with us as a society and as a culture. And so a lot of people, when they're experiencing a mental health crisis and they go to the doctor, their expectation is to be prescribed a pill that's going to fix it. It's way easier to take a pill than it is to change your entire way of eating, than to give up soda, than to give up all these other foods that we're addicted to.
Yeah, or I don't know if you believe in this, but I'm starting to now really believe that your environment has a lot to do with it as well. Are you living in Iowa or Illinois where they're spraying fields next to you? Are you living in a moldy building? What else is going on? Are you living in a new build full of glues and paints and chemicals? Am I off base on that too, that our environment can also be affecting what's happening here? Because I know a lot of people just think it's a genetic fluke, but it seems weird to me that we have an entire generation of genetic flukes.
Oh no, you're not off base at all. I think that there's great potential there for that to be driving a lot of the chronic illness that we see in this country, and it brings to mind this certain framework that we're asked to accept. We're kind of encouraged to say, okay, Adrian, where's your proof that these chemicals are doing this? And we cannot accept that framework because we know that they are intentionally avoiding generating proof like that. We need to insist that the question is, where's your proof that these chemicals you're spraying on our food are safe? Instead of putting it on us to prove that they're not, we need to insist on actual evidence that these things are safe. When you look at what the FDA tests for in terms of the top 25 pesticides used in the United States, the FDA is currently testing for two of them. And of those two, our allowable levels are wildly out of line with the rest of the world. We allow massively higher doses of the very few chemicals we do test for to be in our food supply in the United States. And we're treated like conspiracy theorists when we act like that's a problem. They say, where's your proof that this is hurting people? Well, the proof is in things like rate of cancer, rate of diabetes, rate of autism, all these chronic medical conditions that are getting worse and worse and worse for the citizens of this country. How about you guys prove they're safe instead of putting it on us to prove that they're not? We need to stop accepting that things are framed that way, because all we're doing is enabling these incredibly predatory corporations. All the problems that we have with big pharma, those also apply to big ag. They also apply to big oil. These corporations spend incredible amounts of money on lobbying. They control what's put out of our academic institutions. Yeah, they own the journals. They own the broadcasting companies. It's
It's
not
so
going well.
hard. It's so hard to break into people too because that's all they're exposed to, so they think you're the nuts when you bring it in. I know my personal story, I had terror. I had
Mhm.
absolute terror. I thought that my babies were just going to die. I was frozen with terror. I had intrusive thoughts. I had hallucinations. My family thought that I needed to be committed. And I was like, I
Mm.
know, no, I know. And did some digging and found that for me, it was the mold in our house. And once I left that, all of that went away. But had I gone into the medical system, I would have been committed and put on medication that probably would have never helped me. So I want to give some people some hope here. Is it
Mhm.
possible to heal some of these things that we're being told are unhealable?
Oh, absolutely. I firmly believe that a lot of these things can be healed, and that's why I've started in this direction myself. I'm also very heartened, because I have felt from the beginning that our federal institutions and our academic institutions and our hospitals are all so captured that this is all going to be a grassroots movement. It's going to be people like me and you having these conversations, people like Sean Baker and Dr. Barry and Michaela Peterson talking about these things. That's just going to it's going to have to come from grassroots sources like that to get more people involved. But there are doctors with actual robust academic institutional support starting to make progress with metabolic mental health. So I mentioned Chris Palmer earlier. There's a Dr. Georgia Eady. She's also a Harvard psychiatrist who has a book, Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind. They're starting Chris Palmer is starting a metabolic mental health program associated with McLaren Hospital, where they're going to be doing this, I believe, on an outpatient basis. And there's studies being funded by the Bazooki Group, we're getting more and more and more evidence out there going about how powerful of an intervention this can be. And in all these cases, these people from with this big institutional clout are coming to it from their personal experiences. There's a podcast I listen to called Metabolic Mind, and their first episode talks about the experience of somebody in medical school who has his first is either psychotic or bipolar break. He either went manic or psychotic. I can't remember, but he ended up having to be institutionalized and he got put on medications. And these medications have incredible metabolic side effects. That's another side effect that was hidden from the public and hidden from doctors for as long as they possibly could. That you take these medications, and I've seen somebody put on 70 pounds in 1 month after starting antipsychotic medications. That's how much they can mess with your metabolic health. Antidepressants work on serotonin. 90% of your serotonin's in your gut. It's not even in your head. It's throughout a lot of your body. So back
Wow.
to what yeah. Back to what you were saying, though, so many of these doctors, just like so many of the doctors in the carnivore community, the doctors who are doing metabolic mental health have these kind of stories where they get to a certain age or they have a patient and they have an experience where they see what they were taught and what they've been telling their own patients is not working for them, it's not working for their patients, and they see somebody do the opposite of what is supposedly right and have these incredible outcomes, and it starts them down these rabbit holes, down these bunny trails where they start looking at things and they start kind of questioning things and they start exploring. And all of a sudden we have Dr. Baker's, all of a sudden we have Dr. Avadia's, all of a sudden we have Dr. Barry's, all of a sudden we have Dr. Palmer's who are out there. And maybe there will be some top down reform of these systems at some point. When we hear there's no evidence of that, that needs to immediately be a red flag for us to ask, well, did you actually look for evidence?
Or who looked for evidence?
Yeah, who looked for evidence is a very important question as well. When I try and read clinical research now, the first thing I do is I go down to the conflicts of interest. And if I see a pharma company, it's going right in the trash. And you still have to wonder, though, even if those conflicts of interest aren't listed there, was there a ghost author? Kim Witzak, who I mentioned earlier, part of her lawsuit was getting all these internal Pfizer studies, and most of them had an author listed as TBD, to be determined, because they generate all this research and then they farm it out to academics who need to be part of published research for their careers to progress. And so again, it's this incredibly incestuous system with all these conflicts of interest where the predators thrive. Back in 2004, Marcia Angel, she was the outgoing editor of the New England Journal of Medicine, the most prestigious medical journal in the country. And she said something along the lines of, I reluctantly have come to the conclusion that most of what gets published in our reputable journals cannot be trusted. That's dark. That's dark. That was before Vioxx. That was before OxyContin. And she was already seeing it.
I wish that this would actually unite the people. This is our kids. This is our family members. This is mental health is affecting like everyone these days, as well as the other things, all the side effects, my husband's on blood pressure medicine, my stepmom's on diabetes medicine, everybody's on handfuls of something. And
Yep.
so this is something that should unite us all. Like I used to look at people who talked like this as crazy, and now I think you're my people. And so once
Exactly.
people
Yeah.
open it up and realize how much this affects all of us, and it's not trying to hurt anyone, we're trying to help everyone open their eyes to what's going on so we can solve this as a society, because it's not going to come from someone else. No one else is going to solve this for us. It has to be us, because the people who are controlling it are doing a really good job, and it's affecting everyone. Did we miss anything?
I can't think of anything we missed. I mean, I don't know. I feel like we have so much in common. We're very like-minded. We could probably talk for hours, but no, I think we covered a lot of great ground.
We had a great start.
Yeah.
For sure. I love so much of what you said was very, very helpful, and I'm hoping as you're talking, I'm thinking of my friend who has bipolar, I'm thinking of my sister who has bipolar, I'm thinking my aunt who has schizophrenia, I'm thinking of all my friends who have been diagnosed with depression and anxiety and just can't seem to get better. They just can't. They're taking the medicines, they're not getting better, they're having heart problems, they're gaining weight, they're now having hormone issues, and it trickles onto this and that, and, like, really, we're not at the root of what's going on at all. And it would be amazing if people could start looking for root cause because it's not just going to heal your mental health, it's going to heal all the other pieces too that you have going on, hopefully,
Yeah,
right?
that's exactly right, Adrian. People's depression is not caused by a Prozac deficiency. When they did those antidepressant clinical trials, they struggled incredibly to display an efficacy above placebo, meaning that the people in the clinical trial who were taking a sugar pill were rating their depression as just they were helped just as much as the people who were actually taking things like the SSRI. That it was a negligible difference in efficacy between placebo and SSRI. The difference is the placebo doesn't cause emotional numbness. It doesn't cause physical numbness. It doesn't cause people to dissociate. It doesn't cause violence towards self. It doesn't cause violence towards others.
Yeah.
It's
Well, where can people send all their family members and themselves to come get
yeah.
some coaching with you so they can heal?
They can go to describehealth.com or describe.health. I've got links to my social media on that website as well. I'm having trouble navigating social media a little bit. I'm trying to figure out how to promote myself, but I feel like it's very hard in this day and age to not do business with companies that hate you or that don't represent your values. So I have an account on Facebook and I have an account on Instagram and I have a YouTube channel, but as the years have gone by, I'm just incredibly disturbed by the behaviors of these companies when they were censoring some of the most reputable doctors in the world. And then Instagram was just in the news again recently because of how bad they are at facilitating things. These are despicable companies because they put incredible amounts of censorship towards people's political speech. So I struggle with having a social media presence just because it feels gross to even log into Instagram. I am interested in growing a presence on Twitter and on Rumble, possibly on Locals because those are true free speech platforms. So that's kind of a barrier to me growing an online presence at this point. But I'm trying to figure it out.
You just made me realize this might be the first interview I post to Rumble
All right,
because
go
I have a
Rumble.
feeling it's going to get blocked everywhere else.
It might, yeah, it might. Hard truths.
Honestly, I don't do this for the monetization. I do it because I love the people that are around me and I want them to have what I have. I want them to heal. I want them to feel better. I want them to get true health. I wish everyone went to my functional doctor who saved my life when I had the bad virus because I went to the hospital and they didn't help me.
Yeah,
All they kept doing was pushing experiments on me, and I was pregnant. And so that's my hope is that we can get people nourished, get them well, get them strong, get them living a good life with their families. So thank you for helping me spread that message. I really appreciate you coming onto my show.
my pleasure, Adrian. It was awesome.
Thank you. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in. If you like this, please like, subscribe, and share. Bye.
Bye.